Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steeve Branden, and the topic which I'm going to be presenting today for this poster presentation is about the International Council for Harmonization and about the good clinical practices according to the latest updated versions. Now, first of all, when we talk about GCP, we have to understand what is actually the very core bare definition of a GCP. A GCP, in the name itself, it describes a good clinical practice. Practices in the sense, the rules, the methods, the guidelines that one has to follow to perform clinical research in a consistent manner and also to attain the high ethical and scientific standards of research. Now, GCP kind of is like the core of every clinical research that is being done all over the world. When you talk about GCP, we also have to talk about the International Council for Harmonization. If GCP is the guidelines, ICH is like the core center or the core body which decides upon what regulations to be added and what regulations to be deleted. Now, the International Council for Harmonization is actually a joint initiative involving both regulators as well as industry, which means scientists and also the pharmaceutical companies and industry makers as equal partners in the scientific and technical discussion of the testing procedures required to ensure and assess the safety, quality, and efficacy of medicines. So this is kind of like a core body which decides upon the rules and regulations that is needed to conduct clinical research in a safe manner, which is of course, safe to the subjects, and also to attain the higher efficacy standards that is required for the industry in the form of pharmaceuticals today. Now, ICH and GCP did not just evolve out of the blue. ICH GCP evolved and came into existence because of many tragedies that occurred and many violations that occurred during the course of time. Now, the first and foremost that brought attention to the entire world and especially to the scientific community is the sulfonamide incident in 1937. Sulfonamide is an over-the-counter drug which was being widely used in 1937. And because it was mixed and it was produced in an elixir form by mixing diethyl glycol, which is very poisonous, it resulted in many deaths. This led to the formation of the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which is like the predecessor for the FDA, which is today. Then in 1941, because of the sulfathiazole accident which happened, it led to the formation of a good manufacturing practice guidelines. So companies which manufacture drugs today has to abide to good manufacturing practices to be certified and also being allowed to market their particular drugs. 1971 and close to 1970s is when the requirement for an ethical committee was highly stressed, because from 1900s or before the 1900s up till the 1950s to 1960s, human subjects, in the sense prisoners or mentally retarded people, were used for scientific purposes, for scientific studies by many researchers all over the world, which was not under an ethical rule at that point of time. Since 1971, since it was required for the ethics committee to be brought up, the efficacy of a particular study is given utmost importance. 1971 led to one of the most important reports to be passed, which is the Belmont Report, which speaks about giving an informed consent from the patient for ethical purposes and the guidelines, and mainly for the protection of the human subjects in research. It mainly focused on respect for the persons who are coming in as subjects, that the subject has to be benefited from the research, and justice is given to the particular subject. Post 1996, 1997 is when GCP, 96 was when GCP was kind of formed, and 97 it came into existence. It was followed from 1997. ICH itself was formed way back in 1990 in Brussels. It mainly consists of many developed countries and developing countries. Now then, let's see about the basis of an ICH GCP. What is the GCP and the ICH principle based upon? Well, there are 3 to 4 main reports and a particular event which forms the strong basis of the ICH GCP. One being the Nuremberg trials, which occurred after World War II, wherein many ethical violations were it was being investigated by Israel at the time, and because of that particular trial, many regulations followed. Then we have the most important declaration of all, the Declaration of Helsinki. It is a very key document describing the ethical principles that underlie the worldwide GCP which is being used today. It was set forth by the World Medical Association for Biomedical Research in 1964. It has been revised many a times, and notes of clarification have been added up to 2004. The main focus of the Declaration of Helsinki is to keep in mind that the physician has to safeguard his subjects, whomsoever is related to research. His or her knowledge and conscience are dedicated to the fulfillment of this mission. So this was a core statement that the Declaration of Helsinki stressed upon. And then we have the Belmont Report, as I said earlier. The Belmont Report also stated that the respect for the persons has to be given, respect to the subjects, treat them in a very positive manner. Beneficence for the subject must be present, and justice must be given to the subject in the event of a disaster or a catastrophe. Now, let's move on to the formation of the ICH itself. Now, the guideline was developed, as I said before, for the good clinical practices, mainly by the European Union, Japan, and the United States of America, as well as many countries such as Australia, Canada, the Nordic countries such as Ireland, Norway, and the World Health Organization. Now, the GCP standards, there are two sets of GCP standards. The World Health Organization has its GCP standards. The ICH has its GCP standards. But both of them are more or less similar in their content, only it differs in the field where it's being used. And why is ICH GCP needed? The main reason for ICH GCP, which has been required today, is to identify and reduce differences in technical requirements for drug development among regulatory agencies. This eased out the process of regulating the research being conducted in the field of medicine and other forms, so that the results could be accepted on a world scale, and that main priority is being given to the subjects, first of all, and then towards the safety and efficacy of the particular drugs which is being produced. Now let's move on to the 13 core principles of the ICH GCP. What does the ICH GCP actually say? The ICH GCP, the first core principle is that clinical trials should be conducted only in accordance with the ethical principles having their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki, which is to respect the subjects, ensure their safety, and to give them the justice and to avoid malfeasance, and consistent with GCP and applicable regulatory requirements depending upon whichever country it's being conducted in. Before a trial is being initiated, the risks has to be plotted down. Every single risk is a risk. It is neither small nor big. And always the benefits for the subject has to outweigh the risks. Only then a particular study is fit for a trial or is being passed by the ethical committee to start their trials. Next, we move on to the rights and safety of the subjects must be given the utmost importance and should prevail over the interest of the society. There are many cases wherein, in order to bring a particular medicine into study in the past, the safety of the subjects have been a bit blind-eyed, and because of that, many subjects have, either been impaired or even led to the cause of death. Because of this, always the safety and the rights of the subject have to be given the utmost importance and should prevail over in the interests of science and society. Next, we have the availability and of non-clinical and clinical information on an investigational product should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. Now, this basically means that a particular study has to have a good background research done to support the claims that is claiming to have been accomplished or to be accomplished in the future. Next, we have the clinical trial should be scientifically sound and described in a clear, detailed protocol. We all know that a protocol is one of the most fundamental documents that is required for a clinical research. It describes in detail about how the research has to be conducted and the various areas of how it should be managed. So it should be clear and scientifically sound. Next, we have a point where it says a trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received prior institutional review board, IRB, or the independent ethics committee, IEC, approval or favorable opinion. Protocols which do not receive this can be considered invaluable and the research can be stopped at any time. An approval from the IRB and IEC is of utmost importance before starting a particular trial. The medical care or the medical decisions made on behalf of subject should always be responsibility of a qualified physician or when appropriate, a qualified dentist. Each individual involved in a conducting test should have experience both in education and also in training and should be experienced enough to perform his or her respective task. Freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject. This is another important step when it comes to any clinical trial which is being conducted. A freely given informed consent is a very important process which also ensures the safety of the subject and also ensure that the subject is well known of what kind of research he is volunteering him or herself into. All trial given information should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. There are three other points which can be applied in a wide spectrum. The first is the confidentiality of the patients must always be given importance, and the confidentiality details, which are called as identifiers on the other hand, must be blinded and must be in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements. Investigational products should be manufactured, handled, and stored according to the GMP principles. And there must also be systems for the quality checking of every aspect of the trial which is being conducted. In addition to this, we also have something called the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, the Federal Authority of the United States always publishes its Code of Federal Regulations annually. It contains about 50 titles in which Part 20, our Title 21 is where we find most of the regulations and the rules which are required to be followed when it comes to clinical research. 21 CFR Part 11 speaks about electronic records, electronic signatures, how they should be collected, how they should be stored, the validation principles, etc. 21 CFR Part 16 speaks about the regulatory hearing before the Food and Drug Administration. 21 CFR Part 50 speaks about the informed consent process, the rules when we need to be followed during the informed consent process, preparing of the informed consent form. Then we have 21 CFR Part 54, which speaks about the financial disclosure by the clinical investigators. 21 CFR Part 56 talks about the institutional review boards, the number of members that should be there, the validity of an institutional review board, the dates at which an institutional review board have to be renewed. Then we have 21 CFR Part 58, which speaks about good laboratory practice for non-clinical laboratory studies. 21 CFR Part 312, which talks about the investigational new drug application. What are the factors that must be present in the form? The complete details about the drug, the chemistry, the physiology, the biology of the particular drug. Bioavailability and bioequivalence requirements can be found in 21 CFR Part 320. New animal drugs or investigational use, 21 CFR Part 511. Applications for FDA approval of a biologic license is in 21 CFR Part 601. And then we have the pre-market approval of medical devices, 21 CFR Part 814. Now, each and every parts which I mentioned over here has a long list of regulations which are there. So which has to be followed in order to obtain an approval for a study or for the pre-marketing studies of a drug or even for the post-marketing strategy of a drug. Code of Federal Regulations is a very important factor in governing and also regulating clinical research which is being done today. And this, in coupled along with the 13 principles of the ICH GCP, forms the main core basis of regulations upon which other countries can write their own guidelines and regulatory requirements according to their country and according to their region. So this is all about the International Conference of Harmonization and about good clinical practices and the core principles of the ICH GCP. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. This is again a very good poster that you have made. I have one question, like in the principles of GCP,
Yes, ma'am.
there are two amendments. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So can you elaborate more on that?
The below portion, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, the confidentiality of records that could identify subjects should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality. This basically means that the names of the subject, date of births, any addresses, any sort of an identifier that can be traced back to a particular subject must be kept confidential and also stored in such a manner. This is very much important so that it safeguards research subjects in certain researches that is being considered a bit of a sensitive research area, for example, in the research areas of HIV or in the research areas of cancer. People might not want their names or their addresses to be leaked out or to be known by anyone else outside. So this point clearly says that the confidentiality of records must be maintained, and that not only about this, the records of a particular clinical trial can only be accessed by an investigator, a sponsor, or by if the court of law under a very prescribed order that it should be released to the general public or it should be taken into consideration. Other than that, no other persons are allowed to release or view the confidentiality details of any subjects. Next, we have the investigational product should be manufactured according to the GMP. The main reason why this is brought in is there are certain instances in the past. For example, as I said before, the sulfathiazole incident. Sulfathiazole was an ordinary over-the-counter drug, but the problem came when phenobarbital was actually a sedative, and traces of phenobarbital was found to be in sulfathiazole, which was caused due to contamination. To control contamination type of deaths and contaminated type of illnesses, and to bring a much more cleaner standard into the manufacturing area, GMP was established, and companies from then on till now have to follow the GMP guidelines for manufacturing drugs. The last but not least, and we have systems with the procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial. Now, to assure the quality of every aspect of the trial is where we have in audits, we have monitoring visits, and also we have quality control systems. So all these three combined together ensures that the data collected, first of all, that the subject is safe, the research is being conducted according to the regulations, and that no regulations have been violated. And the third most point is that the data collected is not forged or cannot be changed, or that it is accurate to the point where it can be replicated to a certain extent, even in the future. So these 3 points mainly speaks one about the confidentiality, the good manufacturing practices, and the quality systems that are in place for the clinical research.
Okay. I would just like to correct you on this part.
Okay.
Yeah, the E6 R2 that we say, the
Yes, ma'am.
revised guidelines or the addendum to the original guidelines, in the principles of ICH GCP section, there are only two addendums, only two additions have been done.
Okay, ma'am.
The addition number 1 is in the point number 10 of section 2. Section 2 is principles of ICH GCP, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In that point number 10, in the original guidelines stated that all clinical trial information should be recorded, handled and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation and verification. So this was our original guideline.
Okay,
right?
ma'am.
In the revised, in the addendum, this part is intact. The addition which has been done is this principle applies to all records referenced in this guidance, irrespective of the type of media used.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, why we have specified type of media use? Because you all are aware that now we are using the softwares or electronic
Yes, ma'am.
systems in clinical trials. We have
Yes, ma'am.
in the clinical research and pharmacovigilance and data management, everywhere we are using softwares, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So by this point, they have specified that data handling should be done in a proper manner so that in future, whenever it is required, so that we can do audit or we can interpret the information or we can understand that how and how the things were recorded when actually the trial was conducted. So it mentions that it is irrespective of type of media used. So we have to uh, ensure that data handling is done appropriately both for hard copies as well as for the electronic or e-copies
Okay,
or
ma'am.
any other mode. Okay, that
Okay, ma'am.
that is the first addendum.
Okay,
The
ma'am.
second addendum is in point number 13, that is the last principle.
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay, so this principle is about quality assurance. So the
Yes, ma'am.
original guideline says systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented. Okay.
Yes,
The
ma'am.
addition to this is aspects of the trial that are essential to ensure human subject protection and reliability of trial results should be the focus of such system. So it says that we need to have a system in place which will ensure that quality is maintained throughout the entire trial process. But
Yes,
what
ma'am.
should be the focus of such system? The focus should be two things: the human subject protection
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the credibility of the data. So these are actually the two foundations on which we have built the entire GCP principles, or whatever we do or
Yes, ma'am.
whatever principles you see. It is focused mainly on two things: ensuring that the subjects, the patients who are participating, they are safeguarded, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And second is the data should be accurate, it should be correct, it should be credible, on which the regulatory authorities, or when that the drug actually comes into the market, the people have a kind of confidence that this has undergone a series of experiment which has been done keeping all the ethical and scientific norms in mind.
Okay, ma'am.
So these are only two addendums. So we don't
Okay,
have
ma'am.
three addendums, it's only two addendums.
Okay, ma'am.
Rest all the things are good, it's okay. And another thing I wanted to know is, can you tell me the historical event which kind of had the foundation of informed consent? Which uh, tragedy or which event triggered the concept of informed consent?
Ma'am, I exactly don't know which event which led to the informed consent, ma'am, but I do know that in the past, prisoners were used for example, in a study which involved tuberculosis, which involved cholera in the Philippines. So prisoners were used for that particular study when the government came to know that there were deaths being involved without proper compensation. The only compensation that they were being given is a pack of cigars or cigarettes when it happened in the Philippines. So after that, we had many cases in the US, for example, lobotomy, for example, was carried out on some mentally retarded patients who were found in asylums, mental asylums. So I do think that mainly because of the use of prisoners and also because of the use of mentally retarded people, this mainly focused and emphasized on the need for an informed consent process so that the subject is safeguarded first of all, and that proper compensation is being provided to them in case of death or in case of permanent impairment.
Okay. So, have you heard about the Nazi human experimentation?
Yes, ma'am. But there are many Nazi experiments, isn't it, ma'am?
Yeah. So, we could say that the Nuremberg Code, which was created after the Nazi human experimentation,
Yes,
that
ma'am.
that is actually considered as the first international document which provides us information on informed consent. There are
Okay, ma'am.
other articles where people say that even before Nazi, there was mention about informed consent, but the main, like, people consider that the main event which triggered this concept of informed consent is the Nazi human experimentation, after which we had the Nuremberg
Nuremberg
Code.
trials.
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, Steve. Thank you
Okay,
so
ma'am.
much, and a very good presentation.